So we're seeing a change in perception from an emotional blindness to a sober normalization when it comes to Israel. And when I say emotional blindness, what do I mean? How did it work? Imagine a football game. What do you do when you watch a football game? First of all, you choose side. Who's your favorite team, the red or the blue? And then you pick the story. My team is the good team. My team is the underdog. The other team, they just tackle all the time. And we were robbed from the victory the last time we played together. And you put your emotions, you put your story in your side, and then you kind of distort or shape the reality according to the story you've been telling yourself. So if anyone here have been watching football, you know the situation where you're sitting next to a fan of the other team, and then the ball goes to the goal, and it falls, and you're not sure if it crossed the line or it didn't. And every time, if you're cheering for the team that has scored, you will be sure that the ball passed the line, while the other one will be absolutely sure, in full-heartedly, that the ball did not pass the line. And that's exactly what is happening with the attitudes and the approaches towards Israel. A lot of people choose sides. Usually it's the side that is not Israeli side. And then they choose their story. And their story is Israel is a colonialist, bad country, and we are supporting the Palestinians who are the victims, who are the underdogs. And then we look at our facts or the reality, and we somehow align them to the story we've been telling ourselves. Kind of, as we say in Hebrew, we don't let the facts confuse us. And you see it, for example, I don't know if many of you are familiar with the the invisible gorilla concept. It's an experiment they did in Harvard University about 20 years ago, where they brought a group of students and they put them individually to sit in front of TV screens, and they showed them a basketball game. And they told them there is a red team and a blue team, and your job in this experiment is to count how many times did the blue team pass the ball from one player to another. Ignore the red team, the game itself is not important. How many times did the blue team pass the ball? And from the Harvard students, you know, Harvard, top-notch students, 95% were able to count exactly how many times the ball was passed among the blue team players. But that was not the experiment. The experiment was when they asked them, how many of you noticed something unusual on your screen? And then only 30% noticed something unusual. And the unusual thing on their screen was that in the middle of the game, out of nowhere, a big gorilla walked into the game, to the pitch, did like this, and walked out. Only 30% noticed the gorilla. That's why it's called the invisible gorilla. And if you compare it to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, you see people who are so busy counting Israeli crimes and Israeli actions or unactions that they're not being able to see anything else. There's a big gorilla, political gorilla, on their screen, and they're not even able to see it. The goal is to win the game, and the other team has to lose the game. And that's how it goes, and that's how it is. And people will always believe conclusions. When they believe conclusions are true, they will always believe any argument that supports their conclusion, regardless of how based or unbased it is. So, people can ask me saying this, well, you're kind of disregarding any criticism of Israel. Is it not okay to criticize Israel? Of course it is. In fact, if I would say criticizing Israel is anti-Semitic or bad, then at any given time, 50% of Israelis will be anti-Semitic. Nobody criticizes Israel more than the Israelis. And like other countries in the world, we're not perfect. No country is perfect. But how do we know, how do we distinguish between a criticism that is legitimate and a criticism that is not legitimate? We have to ask ourselves two questions to be able to answer that question. One, does my criticism reflect my values? And the second, is the criticism effective? What do I mean when I ask if it reflects my values? I'll give you an example. If I'm let's say a left-wing, extreme left-wing activist, which is, of course, part of the game. So if I'm a left-wing activist, what I would believe is extreme care for human rights, women's rights and minority rights and the rule of law. So naturally, countries or people who are opposing my values, I will be criticizing, and people who are agreeing with my values will be less criticized. And I would definitely, in those circumstances, join hands with those who oppose my values. Now, I don't know how many of you have seen the demonstrations outside the embassy and in the streets of in Karl Johan Street in Oslo in 2009, January 2009. But you could see extreme left-wing activists, Marxists, marching side by side with radical Islamists attacking Jewish and Israeli targets. Now, explain to me how a radical left activist walks side by side with a radical Islamist who supports oppressing women and denying rights of religious and other minorities in the name of those same rights. It would probably be very similar to having black people in the US marching side by side with the KKK. And that is a very simple way to see that in order for your criticism to be legitimate, it has to reflect the values that you stand for. Now, the next question is my criticism effective or destructive? It's very hard to distinguish sometimes between the two. But there is a test, unperfect, but the closest test to perfect that could be, put by a former Israeli politician, Natan Sharansky. And Natan Sharansky set the 3D test. 3D because it's 3 Ds. Delegitimization, dehumanization, and double standards. What is delegitimization? Simply put, it's denying Israel the right to exist and the Jewish people the right to have a land of their own, a Jewish homeland. And the fact is that today Israel is the last and only country in the world to fight for its right to exist, whether to exist physically or to exist as a homeland for the Jewish people. And an example for people denying Israel's right to exist is, for example, a lot of activists that say that it's not legal, there is no Jewish people, and therefore there should be no Jewish state. People like Ali Linsta, for example, would fit very well to that category. The second D is dehumanization. And dehumanization is very simply put. If we agree that all the criticism that is being said about Israel is correct, let's assume, for the sake of argument, that everything they are saying is true. Would we then get a true picture of Israel? Would we get a full picture about what Israel is about? Well, the answer, of course, is no, because we are witnessing a process of dehumanization, taking the human side out of Israel. For example, people are portraying Israel as a war criminal, a country that is oppressing and occupying and not respecting the rights and not respecting the life of others. Let's say all this criticism is true, and it's not, but assuming. Do we really get a full picture of Israel? No. Because in Israel, if you look at the rights for women, for example, we have the second highest number of women on boards of public companies in the world, second only to Norway. If you look at the rights of the LGBT community in Israel, the gay community, Tel Aviv was chosen 3 years in a row as the most gay-friendly city in the world, not in the Middle East, in the world. Look at black people in Israel. We have Ethiopian Jews. Israel is the only country in the history of the world that helped Africans, black Africans, immigrate to its borders in order to give them full citizenship, unconditioned. The only country that ever did such a move. The Arab minority. There is only one group of Arabs in the world that live in their homeland and enjoy full democracy, full equality, and full human rights, and that's the Arab in Israel. No other Arab person in the world can say that he lives in his homeland while enjoying all those rights. And I heard a joke another day, people saying that if the Arabs had to choose between a liberal state and a extreme religious state, they would probably vote for the extreme religious state and then go living in the liberal state. And in Israel, you have Arabs winning in the last few years only song contests. The winner of last year's, what was it, X Factor, I think it's called, the singing contest, was an Arab woman. We have an Arab who won a modeling contest in Israel, reality show on TV. We have Arab judges, including one that has sent the Israeli former president Moshe Katsav to jail for rape. An Arab judge sent a Jewish Israeli president to jail. A huge number of Israeli doctors in Israeli hospital is Arab. So women, gay, Ethiopian Jews, Arabs, and we even can talk about African Muslims from Sudan. People from Sudan, we have a problem today in Israel that you encounter in many countries in Europe of illegal immigration, people asking for asylum or for jobs. And just think about it. You have a Muslim country, Sudan, that most of its citizens, or not sorry most, but many of its citizens, Muslims, are risking their lives crossing Sudan to Egypt, and from Egypt to Sinai by foot, and from Sinai trying to break into Israel, where most chances are they would be arrested, maybe even higher chances they would be killed, and very slim chance that they will actually enter Israel. And yet, they risk their lives from Sudan, and maybe further, to come into Israel. Now really ask, if Israel is such a terrible, terrible place, would these people really risk their lives attempting to come to it? Probably not. Israel is providing humanitarian assistance today, probably more than most countries in the world. We are providing humanitarian assistance today to Syrians. We've built a hospital on the border with Syria in the Golan Heights, and we are treating Syrians who were injured during the civil war that is taking place today there. And you should see the picture. You see a guy on top of a mountain, his friend is injured. So they put the injured guy in, they roll him in a white cloth, and they roll him down to the Israeli border, because God forbid someone sees them helping someone crossing to the Israeli side. And these Syrian people who are injured, they get treated in Israel, even if we know that some of them, after we will save their lives and after we will heal them, will go back, take a gun and start fighting us. But we don't ask them, are you Sunni, are you Alawite, are you pro-Assad, are you anti-Assad? There is a value to life that is higher than that. Doctors don't choose who to save. And that's what we're doing at the Syrian border. Any person, regardless who he is and who supports, and it doesn't matter what he's going to do the next day, including if he's going to point a gun at us, we are not going to prevent anyone from medical treatment, and that's why we are there. We provided humanitarian assistance to Turkey, to Haiti after the earthquake, to Congo, to Japan, and the list goes on. So, dehumanization was assuming that everything they say about Israel is right. Would you get the full picture? No, because this side is not being presented. And the third D of the 3D is double standards. What double standards stands for is, do you treat Israel, or the Israeli case, the same way you would treat similar cases in other places, or do you treat other countries in similar situations? And Of course, we know the answer is no, because territorial disputes are not unique to Israel. We have a territorial dispute in Cyprus, with Turkey occupying part of Cyprus, an occupation only recognized by Turkey itself. Even the EU and such published a resolution saying that the occupation in Cyprus is illegal, yet nobody's talking about Turkish settlements or Turkey moving people to Cyprus. We know there are territorial disputes in West Sahara with Morocco, China and Tibet, Russia with Chechnya, Russia with Crimea, Russia with Abkhazia. We have territorial disputes in Nagorno-Karabakh between Azerbaijan and Armenia, and the list goes on and on and on. And we even have not just territorial disputes, we have worse humanitarian crises. I mean, they really need to mention the Syrian case, where hundreds of thousands are being massacred by their own people, by their own leaders. Iraq, Sunnis against Shias. Iran, where political opponents are being hanged from cranes. Or Congo, Darfur, or North Korea, or Saudi Arabia, where women are not even allowed to drive. No, we don't see any criticism of that. And I really wonder, and that's a question I suppose every Norwegian has to ask himself that was on those demonstrations in 2009 against Israel, is why am I so concerned with the situation of the Palestinians, but I'm not concerned at all with the situation of the Syrians? Otherwise, where are the demonstrations? And the leaders of this campaign that is targeting Israel are using this dehumanization, delegitimization, and double standards. And they keep repeating the message. They keep repeating it. Even if you disagree with it, it will get stuck in your head. It's like I would ask you now, if Hollywood stars have higher divorce rate than normal people. Most of you will answer yes. Not because Hollywood stars do get divorced more than normal people, but because you hear about divorce in Hollywood all the time. The facts are, the numbers are the same. And that's the same concept, repetition, talking Israel and occupation, Israel and conflict, that creates this mindset that even people who disagree with it find it very hard to disconnect the two and see it in a different way. And where has this old perception led Norway? In 2006, the synagogue was shot by a passerby, we know Arfan Bati. In 2009, we had violent demonstrations attacking Israel embassy and Israeli citizens and supporters of Israel in the streets of Oslo. We've had an increase in antisemitic incidents, including the survey made in the Oslo schools, where 2 out of every 3 kids was harassed for being Jewish. We had the survey made by the Holocaust Center, where 38% of Norwegians were found to compare, who claimed that the way Israel is treating Palestinians is similar to the way the Nazi Germany treated Jews. 38% of Norwegians. Now let me enlighten you. According to the EU, the definition of antisemitism, one form of antisemitism, is comparing Israel to the Nazis. Some people would make a conclusion that 38% of Norwegians are anti-Semitic. I disagree. I just think that Norwegians sometimes don't really know what happened during the Holocaust, and even fewer Norwegians have any idea what's happening today in our conflict. And another result of this campaign, this old perception about Israel, is what is called BDS, which is the attempt to boycott Israel. And we've seen it in cultural fields, in academic fields, and in economy, trade. And let me assure you first, before I talk about BDS, let's just put this on the side. BDS is failing. It's very simple to see how it's failing. This year, the trade between Israel and Norway reached 1.5 billion kroners. That is the highest rate of trade between the two countries in the history of our relations. Never before. Never before did the trade between our countries have been so high. Culturally, not only we don't have less, but we actually have more cultural exchanges and more cultural cooperation between our countries. We've seen it in cooperation even officially between the government of Norway and the government of Israel in a modern dance project where an Israeli choreographer, two Israeli choreographers took a group of Norwegian dancers. They worked together. They made a new piece they made it up together. And today it's running in France, in Sweden, in Iceland, in Israel, and in many other places as a cooperation, as a co-production of Israel and Norway together. This was never before. We've had, 2 months ago, 2 people coming from Israel to tell Norwegians how we can work together to create success story in the TV world, in the drama series, after the Israeli success with Homeland and in treatment. Academically, there was an attempt in 2009 in NTNU, as many of you know, where 34 people in the university proposed an academic boycott against Israel. Well, how did it result? We had 34 people proposing the boycott and 3,500 people signing a petition against the boycott. And of course, the board of NTNU decided to vote against boycott. So, in fact, in all aspects of BDS in Norway and in the world, it is failing. It's not succeeding. And that's because people are not foolish. You know, Abraham Lincoln once said that you can fool some of the people all the time, and you can fool all the people some of the time. But you cannot fool all the people all the time. And people understand that you cannot really support boycott, you cannot support BDS, because again, you're treating people or countries in double standards. If you're really concerned about human rights violations, for example, then you would make a list. And in this list, you would rank countries according to their human rights status or situation. And then you would draw a line. And you would say, okay, this is the minimum I'm willing to accept. Anything below that is too much for me. I cannot take it, so I'm boycotting it. Anything below that line. I don't like boycotts, but it's completely legitimate to decide that. And then you would draw a line, and anything below that line is boycott, and anything above is not. Is this the situation? No. There's only one country that is being boycotted, Israel. There's not any single country, and I think you can agree with me, that the human rights situation in any Arab country, in most Asian countries, and definitely all African countries, is much worse. Yet I haven't heard anyone boycott Saudi Arabia for its treatment of women. I haven't heard anyone boycott Iran for hanging people for being political opponents or gay. I haven't heard anyone in Africa being hanged for corruption or dictatorship. No, the only country that is being boycotted is the only democracy in the region, and the only country where Arabs can live freely in full equality, and the only country that ensures human rights and have complete equality in the eyes of the law for all its citizens. This is the country that is being boycotted. And I saw also the, I will jump a little bit further. I met with people from YMCA, because they declared boycott, or at least like an economic boycott, I think, on Israel a few days back or weeks back. And asked them, why do you boycott Israel? If Israel is your minimum, then there's at least 100 more countries you need to boycott, and probably more. They said, no, well, we have to start somewhere, and this is where we are acting, where we have projects. And it reminded me of a story of Lawrence Lowell, who was an anti-Semite president of Harvard University, going back to Harvard. And in, I think it was the 20s of the 20th century, that he introduced a quota limiting the number of Jews that can study in Harvard University. And then, of course, the Jewish organizations took him to court because they said it's discrimination. How can you make a quota against Jews? So indeed, they went to court, and the judge asked him, well, Mr. Law, how do you explain boycotting or making a quota only against Jews? He said, well, because Jews cheat. Then the judge said, well, Christians cheat too. So Lower answered, don't change the topic, we're talking about the Jews. So, in a way, this is what's happening today with YMCA, this is what's happening with the with other organizations that decided to boycott. They all have a very, very, very lame excuse why Israel has to come first. And it's not because it's where nobody even from them thinks that Israel is the worst oppressor or the worst violator of human rights. Actually, I dare you or any one of them to find me one country who has been in a situation that its existence is being threatened, that is surrounded by peoples who are willing to annihilate it, and yet keeps a better track of human rights than the state of Israel in the history of the world. No one is being able to find such an example simply because there isn't any. And the BDS, the boycott people, they will fail because they also will never be satisfied with any solution of two states in the kind that the Israelis and Palestinians are pushing for. The BDS people, in their own words, are seeking to establish a Palestinian state in the first step, and then change the character of Israel, and therefore removing its Jewish character as a second step. That's them talking, not me. And of course they're pushing peace further because they're kind of pushing the Palestinian leadership into more and more rejectionism towards any compromise. And the results of this ongoing campaigns and BDS is a one-sidedness of extreme views where everyone who disagrees is silenced. And it's very amusing sometimes to see how knights fighting for human rights and freedom of speech are willing to respect your freedom of speech as long as you agree with them. And the result of it was that Norway, in a way, lost its neutral place in the Middle East situation, because Norway, we have to be honest with each other, lost the faith and the trust of the Israelis. Norway is no longer seen as a fair player, as a neutral player. It's seen as taking sides. And that is something that is very worrying. And it's not only from the Israeli side, even the international community has criticized Norway for this. If you remember, just a year ago, there was a report published by the OSCE, which is the Organization for Security Cooperation of Europe. Thank you. And in a report they published about the situation of minorities in Norway, they also spoke about the Jewish minority in Israel, and they said that, and I quote, "Norway should promote a civil discussion of the Middle East conflict and admonish those who in the course of debate would demonize the state of Israel." That's not Israel speaking, that's the international community, that's the OSCE. And I think now, as I said, we're kind of in a turning point, because this has been going on for so many years that I think many Norwegians realize, okay, we went a little bit too far. Something went wrong. Something went wrong. If we're being if we lost the trust of Israelis, if the international community is condemning us for our own attitudes, then we probably did something the wrong way. And I think, well, there are many reasons why the change is happening, but I can say I'm witnessing it since I arrived here about 2 years ago. And we're seeing a movement towards a more balanced approach and normalization of the relations with Israel. Less that emotional blindness, less that contaminated approach towards Israel, less that football approach of let's choose sides. Rather than asking ourselves, who do I support, who do I want to win, because everyone's going to lose if that's the approach, we need to ask ourselves, what is the truth, and how can I be constructive, and how can I be useful to find a peaceful solution to the conflict? It's not a football game. It's reality. It's people's lives here. It's not about winning an argument. I'll let you win any argument you want as long as we can live in peace. So, how do we see this balanced approach by the by Norway taking place in the last years? First, it started with the condemnations, which were due, of the rocket attacks against Israel. It started with Foreign Minister Barth Eide, who defended Israel's right to defend itself in the Operation Pillar of Defense in Gaza, and it continues to this day with Foreign Minister Brende, who also condemned the rockets attack a month ago from Gaza Strip towards Israel. It of course it was very much enhanced with the new government coming into place, putting on the program of the new government that we will introduce a balanced approach to the conflict in the Middle East. And also we see it that Norway, for the first time, is taking action to stop the discrimination of Israel in the United Nations. And I'll give you an example of 2 weeks ago. Well, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Human Rights Council. In general, the Human Rights, Abba Eban, Israel's first foreign minister, ambassador to the UN, he described the UN as the Flat Earth Society. Do you have any idea why? He said the UN is the Flat Earth Society because if Algeria would introduce a resolution suggesting that the earth is flat and Israel is guilty of flattening it, then most chances are that it will pass with 130 supporters, 40 abstainees, and 2 against. So, in that body, we have even a worse body, which became even worse, which is the Human Rights Council that sits in Geneva. And it's amazing that we have new members of the Human Rights Council from 2 months ago, and these new members include China, Saudi Arabia, and Cuba. Certainly, human rights spearheading the human rights fight in the world. And anyway, I'll give you an example of how things work in the Human Rights Council by giving you a report of all the resolutions that were introduced in the months of March, this last month, in the Human Rights Council in Geneva. There were in total 6 resolutions taken during that time. 0 resolutions against or on Hamas, Hezbollah, Iraq, Somalia, Russia, Sudan, Turkey, China, etc. 0. 1 resolution on Iran, Myanmar, North Korea, Syria, and Sri Lanka, and 5 resolutions, guess on who? On Israel. And for the first time in history, in the short history of the institution, for the first time 2 weeks ago, Norway, together with the EU, did not participate in the circus in the Human Rights Council, and for the first time Norway did not take part of what is called Item 7 of the Human Rights Council, where Israel is being singled out and attacked by the Council itself. So this is a new improvement in the relations between the countries. And I would even add, in the Human Rights Council in Geneva, that Norway, not many know that, so you kind of have a scoop. Norway was one of, in the Human Rights Council, in the UN in general, countries are divided into groups. So there is the Latin group, the Middle East group, the Asia group, etc. And Israel was the only country in the UN Human Rights Council not to belong to any group. Why? Because the Middle East countries didn't want it in the Middle East group, and everyone else said, well, you're not part of our group. So we were the only country in the whole place, in the whole council, that is not a member of any regional group. Norway helped Israel in the last few months to be submitted to WEOG, which is Western European and Others Group. And today Israel starting from December last year, is a member of the Western group. And Norway had a very key part playing in having Israel admitted to the Western European group more than 3 decades after the Human Rights Council was established. So I think it also deserves a round of applause. And I think the next step, in order to establish a higher stand of this balanced approach between the countries to really amend things, is also when it comes to the Israeli-Palestinian negotiations. Some of you might have heard already the news that the last few days it's not going very well, the negotiations, and we need Norway to push the Palestinians to recognize once and for all, to recognize Israel as the homeland of the Jewish people, to recognize Israel as a Jewish state. If we talked before about double standards, we talked before about balanced approach. If you believe in every nation's right for self-determination, to have sovereignty, if you believe in the right of the Palestinian people, if you're advocating for the right of the Palestinian people to have a country of their own, how can you support that on one side and at the same time refuse to accept the right of another nation, the Jewish nation, for a state of their own? How can you advocate the right of self-determination of the Palestinians and at the same time deny the right of self-determination from the Jews? Something here is wrong. And the lack of recognition of Israel's right to exist as a Jewish country, this is the core, this is the heart of our conflict. Because the conflict did not start with these 1967 borders occupation. The conflict started about 100 years ago. The occupation only started 50 years ago. And the occupation, the conflict was always about whether Israel or the Jews have a right to be on that piece of land and to have a sovereign state of their own. That was the ultimate dream of the Jewish founders. And today we're talking about the peace agreement, and it's a very one-sided approach to the peace agreement. It's basically what Israel will give and what the Palestinians will take. More land, air, control water, etc. If we want this agreement to really mean something, to signify, to symbolize the peace between the two nations, if we want it to really become a two-sided agreement, then the Palestinians must be willing to give Israel the only thing they have to give Israel: legitimacy. They have to accept Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state. And any peace agreement that will not include that right of the Jews to a state of their own, that will deny the Jews the right of self-determination, cannot be called a peace agreement. And therefore, I believe Norway has to put pressure on the Palestinian leadership to continue negotiating and accept the notion that Israel has a right to exist as a nation state of the Jewish people. And the relations between Israel and Norway also have seen an improvement, not just on the political conflict issues, but also when it regards to bilateral issues, what is called normalization of the relations between the countries. I can tell you, in the 2 years I've been here, it has been almost a train of visits coming and going from Israel to Norway and from Norway to Israel. I can't even remember how many times Foreign Minister Eide and later Foreign Minister Brende visited Israel every time before there was the donor countries conference, the AHLC. They were there. We had officials coming from Israel to Norway, and delegations coming from the Ministry of Trade, from the Ministry of Energy in Israel, from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Israel, from the Ministry of Defense, and vice versa. And I will give you a teaser that soon we're going to have a very high-profile Israeli visiting Norway, and you'll hear more about it later this week. And we also see a cooperation between our countries that is increasing. And we see it in, for example, I gave you before the example of the dance project where Israel and Norway invested together in a cultural bid to promote modern dance co-production. And we've also seen it in the research and the other fields of the two countries, in the TV drama, in culture, and in trade. We've seen the number of trade going up, and both countries have a lot to learn, have a lot to work with each other and gain from learning and working with each other, especially in the oil and gas field that we discovered just lately gas in Israel, and we're working closely with our Norwegian counterparts to try to bring Israeli technology to the oil and gas sector and Norwegian expertise to the Israeli gas sector. So in conclusion, will Norway and Israel realize the potential of cooperation between them? Will Israel finally start being treated as a normal country by the Norwegian public and media and government? Will the anti-Israeli campaign, the boycotts, and the dehumanization of Israel will be put to a stop? Will Norway finally earn the trust of Israelis back? Will Norway become a neutral and fair player in our conflict and in our region again? I believe that if organizations and people that have committed themselves to promoting the relations between the countries will continue their good work, if the new government will remain committed to its promises, then I believe that both our countries can enter a new era of cooperation, of normalization, and I am sure that each and every one of us will gain from this. So thank you very much. It was a pleasure talking to you.